Hi, everyone. Good morning, or good evening, or good night, depending wherever you are. Um, my name is Yosefa. Honored to be part of the Nishmat family, and as a Yotzei Halacha. And this morning I'll be teaching. It's a little bit of a heavy topic for 8 o'clock in the morning if you're coming in from Israel. So in our session this morning together, I want to look at Tehillim Ayin Tet, which is a very, very, very strong, poignant mizmor. And in general, I think that one of the things that's been happening, one of the many, many shifts and changes that we're seeing happen throughout this period, is that there are many phrases, ideas, concepts in Tanakh that up until October 7th felt like they were, I don't know, kind of out of fashion or difficult. Phrases like tzaddik v'rasha and phrases like we'll see in this mizmor about sort of being a mockery among the nations, and things that we felt to a certain degree had been buried in our past. Categories by the way we speak about people. A lot of these clear lines that Tanakh has very rich language for. I think that a lot of us sort of, from a Western perspective, fooled ourselves into thinking that we didn't really need that kind of language anymore. Sin and punishment, jealousy, revenge, all these concepts. And so we sort of would always mine Tanakh for nuance or different ideas. And then the world shifted. Or I don't even think it shifted all that much, but our eyes were opened, and all of a sudden a lot of these phrases became relevant again. And I've been seeing it in all different ways, whether the way people are writing in written word, in newspaper, in journalism. I've seen it in the way that students respond to different things that, a few months ago they would have responded differently. And so in that light, I wanted to bring Mizmor Ayin Tet, which I think is eerily relevant. And in general, I'll just say that Tehillim, one of its many, I would say its central quality that makes it so relevant is dafka its generality. One of the things that makes Tehillim the hardest to relate to is the fact that the tefillot are very general, even when there's a very specific title line, a koteret, what David said when he was running from Absalom. But the content of the mizmor doesn't particularly relate to that incident. And while that is challenging in terms of figuring out when was this mizmor written, when is it really from, what was it referring to, it's what's enabled Tehillim to remain a lasting legacy for Am Yisrael and to really be our first and most transcendent sidur for Am Yisrael, of really human expressions of how they experience their relationship with God because of its generality. And here we have a mizmor, what we'll see, feels just as relevant today as it must have been 2,000 years ago. So the mizmor is here. I divided it up into 4 parts. In general, that is how most tend to divide up the mizmor. Of course, when we learn the mizmor Tehillim without doing that, it's very, very, very difficult to understand what's happening. Otherwise, it sort of just feels like a big blur. But really, there's movement. There's movement of the speaker. There's movement of emotion. And so we're going to learn this mizmor today and try and see what it might have to tell us about the moment of time that we're living in. מזמור לאסף, אלוהים באו גויים בנחלתך, טימאו את היכל קודשך, שמו את ירושלים לאיים. Okay, the first section of this mizmor is a description of the atrocities, or what we would call a kina. I would also say, if anyone is interested, I'm happy to send it. There's already been a kina that was written for Be'eri, for example. This is one of our just oldest ways of expressing mourning. In all societies, by the way, an expression of mourning is through a lamentation, through a song that was usually sung. And there's a debate among commentators what exactly the event is that we're speaking about here. That we say, God, they came into your allotment, and they defiled your Heichal Kodecha, right, your temple, and they turned Yerushalayim. Essentially, they decimated Yerushalayim. And those 3 things are all parallel, right? Tehillim always has a parallelism. We have Yerushalayim, we have Heichal Kodecha, and we have Nachlatecha. All those 3 words refer to Yerushalayim, perhaps also the Beit Mikdash. it seems obviously very plausible that we're referring to Chorban Bait Rishon. And there are some of those who actually think that maybe it's a little bit later. Natnu et nivlat avadecha ma'achal le'of hashamayim, basar chasidecha lechayoto aretz. And here we have the description of how the bodies, right, the corpses of your servants were given as food to the birds, and their flesh was given to the animals of the land. Now, again, and because we have a very short time, we have less than a half hour. I'm not really going to mince words in terms of like building this up. This is eerily, scarily relevant. Okay, meaning we have experienced together a pogrom of sorts, and this is I can't even use more words because it's hard to speak it, but I think that these words are enough, that this is exactly what we've experienced. Shafchu damam kamayim svivot Yerushalayim ve'en kover, and their blood has been spread around Yerushalayim, and there is no one to bury them. Now, it doesn't literally mean their blood has been spread; it means that they have been killed. It's a biblical phrase, they've been killed, and there's no one to bury them. And again, also, right, the difficulty of burial, how the tzaddikim we have who've been working so hard to identify bodies. And again, unless like you really read the details of that, we don't really understand what it means to identify bodies, but it's an unbelievably painstaking, difficult job, considering what's been left. And here the Kina already switches mode a little bit. And he says that we have been ashamed, right? We've been ashamed in front of our neighbors, and we have been a source of mockery. Now, here is very much speaking about the speaker understands the way that they are seen in the eyes of others. And this too is something that is eerily relevant. I would say that for me, the first time that I really understood the way that those who are not sympathetic to Israel's cause saw us was really in the previous sort of round of war in Amud Anan, in Pillar, I don't remember what it's called in English. That was the first time I think that many of us really got how much no one was on our side, and that no matter what we did, no one was going to be supportive. And that's very much the feeling of being alone, of saying, what do you mean? I'm the one suffering, and I'm just a mockery. Everyone thinks that this is one big joke, or at least we feel like we're in a joke because it's being turned on our head. Adma Hashem te'enaf lanetzach tiv'al kamo esh kinatecha. And here we have something that gets a lot less press in our study of Tanakh, and that's a very simple request for revenge. And he says, God, until when? Right? Until when will we be destroyed? Or will be destroyed by fire? But here it's speaking about the fire of God's anger. Shvo chamatcha ala goyim. Don't turn your anger on us. Turn it on the goyim. Turn it on those on the outside. Now, this is, of course, a phrase that we say from the Haggadah. Shvo chamatcha ala goyim asher lo yeda'ucha. Be angry at them, those who don't know you, those who don't have a relationship with you. Ba'al mamlachot asher b'shimcha lo karau. And again, the parallelism, and also pour your anger on the kingdoms who don't call on your name. Because we've already been eaten alive, right? There's nothing left of us. There's nothing left for you to avenge. Okay, here it's expressing the fact that God Himself is a jealous or a vengeful God, but we feel like it's on us, right? We've had enough. There's nothing left of us. Please turn it on somebody else. Now, of course, this pasuk of Shvot Chamatcha has a very interesting history within the Haggadot of where it was put in and then it was taken out and put in, a little bit like the pasuk from Aleinu L'Shabach. And I think I love very much that in Rabbi Sachs's Haggadah he says, with all the bad things that have happened to Am Yisrael throughout the years, the fact that we have one phrase that makes it in there about the fact that we would like God to sort of take revenge upon our enemies, not so bad, okay? But it's relatively peaceful as it goes. But here again, we have a call to say to God, please turn your anger somewhere else. I just want to show you one thing here. Okay, so we have a number of a number of places where we really refer to God as a jealous God. I think the one that's often more famous really is in Eliyahu's conversations with God, where he speaks about the kin'ah of Hashem, that he sort of embodies God's jealousy and takes it on the people. But there too, the jealousy is one, the desire for a world that is much more perfected is really taken out on Am Yisrael, who at that point were doing Avodah Zarah. But of course, we speak about an El Kana, right? We speak about a God who is vengeful. And in this case, the Baal Mizmor says, but stop taking it on us, right? Use that trait of yours, God, and take it on other people. We want to redirect that energy. I'm going to go back to the Mizmor. אל תזכור לנו עוונות ראשונים, מהר יקדמונו רחמך כי דלונו מאוד. Okay, he says, please, the speaker says, do not bring back, don't invoke the sins of the earlier generations. Now, this, of course, refers to the theology of al-banim, al-shlishim, al-ribeim, the idea that we have sins that sort of carry over the generations. Now, this is really a shir unto itself. I'll just say in one sentence that this ideology or this theology that we pay for the sins of our fathers is one that really, really underwent a lot of change over the period of time that the Tanakh, the different books of Tanakh, because we see later books of prophecy where there's really a rejection of that idea, and we see a discussion of like Yechezkel, that this is a very complicated idea. What do you mean? Why should I have to suffer because of something that my grandfather did? And it happens to be in world cultures at large. This idea was prevalent, still is prevalent in certain cultures. The idea that our ancestors are still very much intertwined with our lives today. And already in the period of Tanakh, there was a very big backlash to that concept. And okay, so I see the question, and that's what I said now, that there's really a much bigger conversation to be had about what our relationship is with the actions of our predecessors. This Mizmor, I'll just say, is reflecting an idea that we can suffer for the sins of our fathers, and the speaker is saying, please put that on the side for now. I don't want to be suffering for anybody else, i.e. I'm suffering enough. Okay, so it's an expression of my suffering has reached a certain height that I can no longer bear anything else. עזרנו אלוהי אישנו על דבר כבוד שמך, והצילנו וכפר על חטאותינו למען שמך. And here we have a request of God, right? Not just send it off to the goyim, but a request. God, please, right? Our helper, our God, please save us. And forgive us for our sins for the sake of your name. Okay, so there are two different things that are very significant here. The first is the assumption that this bad has befallen the people because of their sins. Now, we have two different, completely opposing perspectives that make their way into Tehillim and in so many texts in Tanakh. We have Mizmorei Tehillim like this, which is first a lament and then becomes a communal request that mention no sins at all, right? Meaning it mentions the difficulty that we're going through, the enemies are overtaking us without mention of sin. And then you have Mizmorim like this, which do mention sins. And those are two different perspectives. One that says whatever is happening is not because of this, what I have committed, meaning it's not a tit for tat system, but it's something that's simply come upon me. And then you have Mizmorim like this, which assume that this evil must be coming upon me because I've done something bad. And I would say that as moderns, we really waver between those two perspectives. That we, on one hand, shy away from saying, God forbid, that somebody fell ill because they were a sinner. Right? That's a very difficult thing for us to say in the modern world. A lot of times we really tend more towards a Rambam-esque perspective of there's a natural way of the world. On the other hand, we also introspect, right? We also introspect and say, well, I'm not going to try and get involved in God's equation, but I'll at least introspect for myself. And when I talk about sins, I'll speak about maybe things that I've done, things between other people and ourselves, or societal ills, for example. And maybe also say, okay, and I could do better in my mitzvot, but we have a very hard time I think justifiably so, drawing a direct contact, direct connection, correlation between our sins and things that have happened. As a collective, as a people, okay, there is obviously tremendous. Sometimes there's real need for that. We need to do a certain cheshbon nefesh, and I do not want to go into that too directly with regard to what's happening now. But while I certainly think that it's really it's sinful, honestly, to say, oh well, such atrocity happened because of X, Y, or Z mitzvot that weren't being kept. Those are phrases that I think we need to be very careful of. I think that we can, we should have a real introspective moment and say, where were we as a society that enabled this kind of thing to happen? It doesn't mean that it is that fault, but it is that this shines a light on those elements that need improving. They're very different language than saying a blame. A blame language is not helpful. A looking for ways to improve is much better. In the words of Rav Soloveitchik, it's not asking lama, it's not asking why, it's asking lema, right? For what? Meaning, let's see where we can move forward from here. And while that's not the language they use in Tanakh, I think that the dual pathway of because of sins or not because of sins can also be a little bit of a lighthouse. It can be something that we sort of aim towards in our conversations also today. למה יבואו הגויים איה אלוהיהם, יוודע והגויים לעינינו, נקמת דם עבדיך השפוך. Now here we sort of return back to this idea of the goyim. If in the earlier section we said, God, please, right, bring your wrath upon them and not upon us. The other thing that is really powerful about this mizmor is that the speaker turns to God exactly the way that Moshe does after Chet Egel and says, you're embarrassing yourself, God. It's a very gutsy preposition, okay? God, for your name, we are a reflection of you, right? Just like our children, right? All of our children to a certain degree reflect us, okay? And on the good days, we're happy for them to be a reflection. And on the bad days, we often have to remind ourselves that, okay, we raised them and we're similar. And of course, a lot of what they go through has to do with the way we raise them. But at a certain point, they have, they take responsibility for their own choices, and it can't only be a reflection back on us, right? It's a very, very difficult balance as parents, especially as they get older. And on one hand, we sort of forget a lot of the patterns of when they were little. On the other hand, the choices they make are bigger and have much bigger reverberations, especially if they're not the ones we would have wanted them to choose. And here it says, God, we are a reflection of you, just like children are a reflection of their parents. And why do you want that? Right? Why would you want this? It's making you look bad. תבוא לפניך, פסוק י"א, the 11th פסוק, תבוא לפניך אנקת אסיר, כגודל זרועך הותר בני תמותה. Speaking about a phrase that all of a sudden became relevant, the pleading of the prisoner should reach your ears, God. Right? The pleading of those hostage should please reach your ears. And you be large in the Hebrew sense. Be giving, right? Have clemency with us. What are we? We're mere mortals. B'nei tmuta. We're mere mortals. והשב שכננו שבעתיים אל חיקם, חרפתם אשר חרפוך אדוני. And here again, a final request for revenge. Give it back to them 70-fold. And that's a phrase from Sefer Bereshit, from Cain, from Lemech, okay? That's a phrase taken from there. Give it back to them much more than we have, right? This is and I will get back to the last pasuk in a moment. Here is a real effort to redirect God's anger. Now, why is this mizmor important? Why am I bringing this? Because there have been all different responses by people to the events. Some people, they don't go to a God place right away. It's not their space. It's not the relationship with God. They're more in the political realm. They're thinking about societal fissures. But many people who have a rich relationship with God are finding themselves in a bit of a bind. God, what is this? How could you let this happen? Meaning, these really already fell asleep? They fell asleep for the morning. How is this possible? And that's a voice that needs to be spoken. I'm not saying in the press right now. I don't think it's the time for that kind of reckoning. We're not there yet. It's just weakening to do that now. But on a religious level, on a spiritual level, this mizmor is an important voice for us to hear, because not everybody is just in a God, please help me space. They also, but sometimes it's like this: God, take revenge upon them, get them back for what they've done. And it's not a dirty thing. It's right here in Tanakh. You can hope that your enemy falls and still be a humane fighter. We see that very much. This is something that is quite possible. Now, in the time that remains, I want us to look at something that has to do with the last pasuk. The last pasuk says the following: "Ve'anachnu amcha v'tzon maritecha nodeh lecha leolam ודור נספר תהילתך." We, God, are your sheep, right? You are a shepherd. Again, we're usually familiar with that from Tehillim Kaf Gimel, but it appears in many places. We will thank you for eternity, and we will speak your praises for all generations. Now, this pasuk feels a little bit disconnected with all the previous ones, from the previous ones. The speaker was just very angry. And they sort of like, woo, very quick turn. Okay, God, but I'm with you. Now, I will say that in a conversation I had with students 2 weeks ago, they said, nah, the last pasuk must be said al t'nai, must be a conditional statement. If you do what we said, if you avenge the goyim, then we'll be with you forever. Okay, so it happens to be that I don't think that's correct, because there are many mizmorei Tehillim that end like this, where they want to, I would say in our modern jargon, they want to sort of tie it up with a bow, right? They want to end it nicely. But I actually want to read into this, and in no way I'm saying that I think this was necessarily the initial intention of the Baal Mizmor, but I want to read into this pasuk for a moment. And Dafka, that jarring feature of anger, you're shaming yourself, God, please spill over your jealousy, etc., etc., or we're being eaten by birds, we're being eaten alive. And then at the end saying, but we'll praise you forever. I think that combination is very important, not simply to say, oh, just because it's pious. I think that it very much colludes with something that we see in much of Tanakh. Okay, I'm going to sort of take a massive question and speak about it in our remaining 4 minutes, okay, which is to say the following: that we have a general question in our lives still today, and certainly with refractions of that in Tanakh, which is, how do we respond to evil in the world? What are we supposed to do about it? Is it something that should make us not believe in God? And I put under this all things, whether all things difficult of disease, right? Of evil, of war, of terrorism, right? Anything that is considered evil, right? And we have this classic, the theodicy, the question of, what does that reflect about God? But if God is all good and he made a world that was good, then where does evil come from, right? And on those questions, it's also the question that the first story in Tanakh comes to answer, right? Where does evil come from? Man's bad decisions, very simply. But that's not enough, because when the evil is not of our own creation, what is, or is there supposed to be a response on our part to that evil? And we're supposed to just put our hands up and say, okay, well, there's olam hazeh and olam haba, and people will get what they deserve, right? That's one approach. But we have a different approach that I think is very, very significant. And with this, we'll end for today. And that is kind of the concept of protest. When God tells Abraham that he is going to destroy Sodom. Now, it's not that Abraham comes up and says, God, I heard about your plan. It's not a good one, right? What if there's tzaddikim there? That's not what happens. God comes specifically to tell Abraham in a way that very clearly seems to want to awaken Abraham to a conversation. God could have just done what he wanted to do. He didn't need to have a conversation with Abraham beforehand, and he initiates the conversation with Abraham. And then we have the classic debate. Oh, but maybe there were 50, there were 40, there were 30, there were 20. And And of course, it doesn't work because there aren't enough. But that model, why is that model there in Sefer Breshit? To tell us that when there is evil happening, or when we perceive even the way that God is running his world that we think is painful and that is cruel, we have an obligation to stand up and fight it. Moshe does the same thing over and over again. Gideon, I brought just as an example in Sefer Shoftim, right? The Malach comes to him at the Goren and he says, where God left us, God who took us out of Egypt? What do you mean? He's not with us anymore. Again, these are all just direct quotes in the Psukim. But and we bring in those figures because there is something to emulate there. They are supposed to raise their voice. They are supposed to say, God, you are shaming us and yourself. What is this? But the last pasuk of the Mizmor is very significant because with that protest, we have to join together with God in that covenant. We have to be in that relationship with God. That anger is not meant to shatter our relationship with God. It's meant, certainly in the world today, a world devoid of prophecy already for thousands of years, we are meant to become partners with God in fixing what's happening. We are not abandoning. In the end of what I brought here, that they separate for that moment after that conversation, but Avram will still continue to be in covenant with God. And so this Mizmor, with its kind of jarring ending, for me, kind of is a paradigm of this idea. It's really important to speak that voice, to speak that difficulty. I'll just end with this one line from Rabbi Sachs. Again, we are reminded of the book of Iyov. Having heard God in the whirlwind recovers faith, though it is a faith without answers. We're yelling, did God respond to us and tell us why our blood was being spilled around Yerushalayim? No, he didn't. The book then ends with a concluding chapter in which Job's fortunes are restored. At the beginning, Job's sons and daughters died. At the end, he has new sons and daughters. To some readers, this epilogue had seemed unconvincing, as if Job's suffering could be unwritten by a happy ending. To a post-Holocaust generation, the epilogue, I'll explain that he's referring there to academics who say that, oh, the ending was sort of added on to sort of tied up nicely with a ribbon, which by the way, is exactly what they say about the end of Mizrei Tehillim, like the one we just saw. It doesn't fit. How could somebody so angry end with something like that? To a post-Holocaust generation, the epilogue is disclosed in its full profundity. Job has no answers, but he has been lifted beyond his personal tragedy by the knowledge that he could still speak and be spoken to by God. This gives him the strength to go on living and have children after catastrophe. So in the context of Iyov, he moves forward. Because that's all he can do, and because, says Rabbi Sachs, Zichron Levacha, that he's been emboldened by his ability to still engage with God. So we may not have that kind of relationship with God. We can't speak directly to God, but the end of the Mizmor is very much a reflection of where we are truly today. We can speak, we can be angry, we can ask for revenge. But ultimately, in the end, we have to partner with God to bring into our reality that which we would like to see in it. We don't have the privilege to just sort of pick up our hands and wait for God to come and save. That's not the way that our world functions. It's much more of a partnership with God. And so I guess I'll end with a tefillah that we will have the courage and the fortitude. We have been awakened to a need for a tremendous, tremendous war, much broader than the physical war we're fighting, of an intellectual war, of understanding that there have been powers at play that have been orchestrating this moment for a very, very long time. And my tefillah is that we, together with God and with all of the best intentions and capabilities that we have, will be able to turn this around, because nobody wants to remain, nor should we ever have to remain in that moment of shame. We have the power and we have the capacities to rise far beyond. So Be'ezrat Hashem, I guess we'll start our day with that tefillah.